Go.
Are you like asking me questions, or you just want me to?
Just go. Just explain the whole thing for him.
All right. So this is the Pandora firing device. We call it Pandora. We would like for it to be known as the Mark 55. We developed this with some significant input from Tier 1 Special Operations personnel on the breaching side. Generations of master breachers gave us the design input on this, and then our design guy Josh Parker made the thing work. List of requirements that we were given relating to form factor, the size of an M4 magazine, and I think that related a little bit to the pouch. You know, it doesn't need a specific pouch to hold it. You already have M4 magazine pouches. This thing will go in. Another part of the requirement was it had to have an external safety, and so it does, and it can be actuated from either side of the device, clearly marked fire and safe. The safety, all the safety does is eliminate the capability of the trigger to move, and so extremely safe with it on safety, and then we'll go over the rest of the redundancy of safety. This thing was particularly designed to be a safety related device. It will address the Ensign Bickford inline initiation systems. We have some brass adapters for guys that use 209 primers and no-nail. But this thing is purely made to initiate non-electric shock tube for EOD or breaching purposes, or whatever the end user desires. Very simple to use. If the safety's on, the trigger doesn't work. If you want to fire the device, you take the safety off and fire it. If that doesn't work, fire it again. And it's immediate restrike capable, which was another tenet of the requirement. Striker fired was also one of the tenets of the requirement. Josh did a really good job of keeping this as simple as possible, and you may see some similarity to some system components that you're already familiar with. So as far as the disassembly process, those two screws keep the rear cover plate on. There's a small button here that you have to depress and then slide this plate off, and that gives you access to the internals of the device. The next thing you do is pull the side cover plate off, and now you can remove the entire trigger assembly. This is a return spring and guide rod. These are strikers, and also in the system are striker block safeties. The trigger assembly has two independent sears that are sprung against the assembly, pinned in place, and then underneath the safety is a spring and a ball for detent. So you can hear that clicking. It's really positive. Stays in place. Goes back together the same way it came apart. You put in your striker blocks. As far as part of the operating system, you can see that this surface here is kind of raised, and if in the cycle of operation, the only time that the strikers are capable of protruding from the breech face, functional breech face of this device, is when the trigger is at this position. Any variation from that, if it's forward of that, the striker blocks are blocking the channels, and the strikers cannot protrude. So it's safe all the way through the firing cycle until the position where the sears are actually released, and you can see the sears mechanically pulling in they ride these ramps, and when they get to that part, the timing of the device causes it'll cause the sears to disengage from the striker, and the strikers will fire forward. The tip of the striker will protrude from the breech face in the device. So putting it back together, and we can kind of function test the safety, the striker block. Not a lot of movement. Now that the striker block's depressed, you can fire the device, but only right there. Anywhere else, no way. Another redundant safety feature is the sear engagement with the striker. That minimal clearance right there means that if you have a charge connected to this, even with a punch and a hammer, I cannot force that striker to go past that sear. It won't. Physically, it's impossible to get it to go past that. The only way that you can fire this is to pull the trigger to the rear and release the strikers. Back in with the guide rod and spring. Back in with the cover plate. If you want, I can show you what it looks like in operation. We can run it without the side cover plate, so you can watch the mechanism actually work. You can see it releasing both strikers independently but simultaneously. That was a tenet of the requirement. Independent but simultaneous operation. So if one side is fouled and there's a problem on one side of the device, you still, in a dual initiated charge, you still get an initiation function. So pretty simple, a little bit of lubrication and easy to clean. You can use a shop towel, a paper towel, rub out whatever debris or dirt gets in this. One of the other things Josh tried to do was to minimize any points where debris could enter. And the device is nearly completely sealed in every regard. Even in the breech face, the strikers are blocking the holes in the breech face, so debris is not prone to get in, into the interior mechanism of the device. But that's it. Pretty short class. If you don't want this to go off, you can treat it like a firearm. It's a little bit like having a safety on a striker fired handgun. If you don't want the handgun to go off, don't take the safety off and squeeze the trigger. If you don't do any of those things, it will never go off. And if you do, it will go off every time. And that's kind of been the history of the device. The testing that was done by Crane, the last line of the test report says that they stopped at 5,000 live fires without a failure and assumed that that was probably plenty. It's been in use with the Army Tier 1 SMU guys for, I think we're going on 5 years now, and I have never had a report of a failure with this device. Ensign Bickford, the guys that make the inline initiators and the shock tube, actually use this device to QC their shock tube and inline initiators at the factory. They've told me that it's significantly easier for the people that work there to use this device to do their job. So this is what they're testing the initiation systems with, which is a credit to, again, Josh's design and all of the input we got from real world end users on what this thing needed to do.